My name is Jeremy Juro, and welcome to Improving Your Team, part of the Becoming a Great Scrum Master course of the Scrum Master Fundamentals course series. In this module, you'll learn how to facilitate a successful sprint retrospective that will help your team reflect on areas for improvement in their own process. And you'll learn strategies for effectively focusing your team's attention during the retrospective's time box so they can concentrate on the issues that are the most important to them. And you'll learn how to improve the likelihood of success of the action items that your team chooses to tackle in that next sprint. Shortly after the sprint review wraps up, Deborah, Ben, Jim, and the rest of the stakeholders file out of the room. Alan stands to address the team. We'll now begin the final sprint ceremony prescribed by the Scrum framework, the Sprint Retrospective. The Sprint Retrospective is your opportunity to reflect on how the previous sprint was executed and to look for opportunities to improve in the next sprint. Just as the sprint review was your stakeholders' opportunity to review the product increment and to collaborate with you about what could be delivered in the next sprint, the Sprint Retrospective is your own opportunity as a Scrum team to review your process and to collaborate on how to improve that process in the next sprint as well. Before we begin, let's take a moment to discuss some of the objectives and the ground rules of the Sprint Retrospective. In this session, we'll be focusing on how you're working with the Scrum framework itself, the relationships both within the team and within the broader organization, or any concerns around tooling or other supporting infrastructure that the team relies on to work effectively throughout the sprint. The retrospective always occurs between the sprint review and the next sprint planning. This allows you time to consider any events that may have occurred during the previous sprint and to develop a plan to address those events in the next sprint before beginning sprint planning. The Scrum framework also specifies that the retrospective should be time-boxed to 3 hours for a 1-month sprint, but it may be proportionately shorter for shorter sprints. Since I like to encourage teams to leave themselves plenty of space to consider any improvements that they may want to attempt as a team, I recommend that you time-box your retrospective to 2 hours. And as the Scrum Master, it's Louise's responsibility to facilitate the sprint retrospective. But as a member of the Scrum team, he's also expected to participate and to contribute along with the product owner and the development team. But since this is your first retrospective, while Louise will be facilitating this ceremony, I'll be providing guidance to him throughout today's session to help the entire Scrum team get the most from this ceremony and to help him steer clear of some common pitfalls that can occur. "Thank you, Alan," says Louise as he stands up near the conference room's whiteboard. Now that we understand the objectives of the sprint retrospective, let's talk about how to facilitate it. The Scrum framework does not actually prescribe a format for the sprint retrospective, only goals. So this gives us a lot of flexibility to find the format that works the best for our team as long as those overarching goals are met. Alan has taught me a simple retrospective format that we can use as a starting point, but know that we're free to alter this format to better fit the needs of our team, and that there are much more creative formats available that we can also consider. So you may be wondering, what are the goals of the retrospective that we keep referring to? Well, I'm glad you asked. The sprint retrospective has 3 simple goals. First, we want to inspect the last sprint and understand how the people, the relationships, the processes, and the underlying tools in the sprint work together to allow us to deliver the product increment. And then we'll want to identify any major items that went well and anything that could be improved. So once we identify those items, we can understand what we want to improve and build a plan for implementing those improvements in the next sprint.